This is Jay Dyer from Jay's Analysis. You're listening to Esoteric Hollywood. Esoteric Hollywood is where I deconstruct the biggest films in an unparalleled way, from the classics of the silver screen to today's blockbusters. Learn to watch film with new eyes as we enter Esoteric Hollywood. Welcome, you're listening to Esoteric Hollywood with your host, Jay Dyer. Tonight my guest is Jamie Hanshaw, and we're going to do a specifically focused talk and interview on her three books, Operation Culture Creation 1 and 2, and of course, Hollywood Mind Control, the most recent new book that will be featured specifically in Hour 2, which if you're listening to this, the first hour, of course, is free, and you can subscribe for $4.95 a month to get all of my talks and lectures and interviews and Jay's Analysis at the PayPal link. So the second hour, of course, will deal with more of her work in Hollywood Mind Control. And of course, you can pick up Operation Culture Creation 1 and 2, as well as Hollywood Mind Control at the links at Jay's Analysis or at Freeman TV Weird Stuff. In that section, you can purchase those there. So please get them there. Please do not buy them on Amazon. That is a way that authors actually don't make as much money when you purchase it on Amazon. So let's start with Operation Culture Creation Part 1. And I read these books. They're really good. They're really insightful, especially to give to people who may be new to this kind of material and looking into stuff. They're good as a wake-up, kind of in a coffee table book format. But Jamie, tell us about Volume 1 and how this came to be and where you got the idea.
Okay. So one day I just, this magazine came across my desk, and it was a magazine about masonry and magic. And I was just flipping through it, and I thought, well, I could do better than this because it wasn't very in-depth, and I felt that some of their conclusions were kind of wrong and weird. So I thought, this looks easy enough, and I can write articles, and I can compile pictures, and so how hard can it be? And so I wrote this kind of as like your secret weapon to introduce your friends and family to this kind of tough subject matter that you might be going through and feeling alone that you can't talk to people about it. So this is something that you can just leave out on your coffee table, and they'll pick it up and they'll flip through it, and there's tons of color pictures and little stories and anecdotes and fun things that make it look not so serious and scary for people who are not used to this subject matter.
Right.
And then the title is kind of a little inside joke because once upon a time I was in a relationship, and I was very lonely looking at all this subject matter and having no one to talk to, and so I would be all alone in my little computer world looking up all the different conspiracies and
Talking to the aliens.
Yeah, all these weird stuff. And so he would come home and he would say, "What have you been doing all day looking at weird stuff?" And I'd be like, "Well, I've been learning about life and important things that not a lot of people know about." And so I kind of wanted to write this in a fashion that, if you were a 16-year-old, you would be interested. If you were a 60-year-old scholar, you would still get something out of it.
Well, I'm a 60-year-old scholar, and so I know that when I got my first copy, I put it on I taped it to my walker, and as I was walking through the library on the way to the Senior Citizen Center, I worked my way through your workbook. It's almost a kind of workbook. But okay, so let's talk about the beginning of Weird Stuff, Operation Culture Creation, Chapter 1. So you start talking about kind of, I guess what you could call an esoteric view of the world, as opposed to starting with like the naturalistic, materialistic view that most people have. Or if you go to college, you're probably going to get introduced to some form of like naturalism or Darwinism or ultimately meaninglessness. And I noticed that right away you kind of have some images of cymatics, and I'm a big fan of that. I think it's a very important insight into the way that reality is actually structured and clearly designed format with geometric forms that are present through sound. And we know this again through the study of cymatics. So maybe you could talk about that a little bit.
Okay, sure. So part one actually asks the question, are you a person or a product? So when you are looking at the cover, you see two little children and they're being programmed by the television set, and they have a sorcerer who is kind of enchanting them with a robot made of iPhones and iPads, kind of a commentary on how children are raised on screen and corporate characters through their whole life. And so we'll kind of get to that in the second part. But so yeah, the first chapter is called The Magic Kingdom, and it's all about what is magic, because when you are studying this stuff, you come to find out that this is a very serious topic, and a lot of great thinkers and smart people and wise, scholarly, learned people are very interested in magic. And so you mentioned cymatics, and that is kind of the part about how words of power and thoughts can make changes in the three-dimensional world. So in this chapter we talk about the use of imagination and willpower is kind of the definition, the rough definition of what magic is. So anybody can do that. So in a sense, we're all kind of using our magical powers to create the world around us by thought. And not a lot of people are trained in this way of thinking, and so they just kind of let their thoughts wander and, let other people make their thoughts for them and decide their decisions for them. And so that's kind of where it gets into sorcery. So this chapter starts at the beginning of time, caveman days, where they would make a painting about hunting, because what their goal was to, make a kill. And so they would draw themselves doing this on the cave walls before they went out for the hunt. They would
predictive hunting programming.
Right, using the imagination and the will to make an outcome in the world. So this is a very primitive form of magic, and magic is a subject that you can make it as clinical and technical and scholarly as you want, or you can keep it, simple, just like these cavemen were doing, and depicting what they wanted in the world before they actually set out to do it.
Well, I think that that's kind of a generic statement about what humans do in general. So, I don't believe in promoting any kind of like sorcery or anything like that. I'm not saying that you're doing that. I'm just wondering, like, what would you say to someone who says, well, that's just what humans do anyway, so like, what's the point?
I would totally agree with that. And so this is a latent ability that we all have that is being usurped by dark people and secret societies and people in power. That's why the second chapter is called Sorcerers and Robots. So it's them stealing your ability to co-create, with God, to make a world that we could all be happy in. And a sorcerer would be concerned with forms of mind control and using your power of imagination against you. And so this is kind of why I put Disney in there, because one of their major taglines is how to capture your imagination. And I think that the point I'm trying to make is that they capture your imagination and they put it to work for them. And that is the definition of sorcery as opposed to magic.
Well, you call it Sorcerers and Robots a love story. Why do you say that?
Because every time you see a robot, there has been some kind of dark occultic power behind it. I'm thinking of Metropolis robot, and I'm thinking of the Golem. So a sorcerer is someone who wants to take someone else's will, exactly, and make them a slave to the sorcerer's will. And so then you have Mickey Mouse being the sorcerer's apprentice, right? And the sorcerers, we can go into who is the sorcerers. I put Aleister Crowley at the top of that list, and his religion of Thelema, which means will. So it's taking someone else's will and putting it to your own dark uses.
Mm-hmm. And so essentially, you talk about logos, like corporate logos, and how this is a kind of communication to the subconscious, and that's what goes on, in the psychology of advertising and marketing. And then you talk about the Tavistock Institute. Now, this is important. It's something that I've talked about quite a bit because that was involved in the idea of culture creation and the idea of using the arts and so forth and different social engineering, sociology strategies for mass control. And so tell us about what you came up with in terms of the Tavistock Institute, and ultimately this connects into mind control and Hollywood as well, which we'll get into more in part 3 of this, but tell us about that.
Yeah, there's a really good picture that kind of illustrates my point, is that when biologists are dealing with creating things in a lab, what they use, the little petri dish, is called the culture media. So they introduce different things into the petri dish and to grow what they want to grow. And so what my point is with this book is that our culture is not a organic thing that comes about from everyone's
right.
Agreeing that this is cool and this is not, and this is what we want, this is what we don't. And so that's kind of where the Tavistock Institute comes into play, because a lot of the music, the movies, the ideas, the political movements, and all the rest of it that you think is just kind of growing in itself has been planned out long before we were even born.
It's what the Pentagon and the think tanks and the NGOs give us as our so-called culture.
Exactly.
Like you pointed out in the film Josie and the Pussycats.
Right. And so, like, there's a scene there where they have, what do you call it, like subliminal messages in the music, and everybody's in Tower Records and they all are wearing pink or something, and then they put this certain record on and everyone's brains just kind of flips and switches, and they're like, orange is the new pink, and we all start wearing orange now. And so this is where fads and fashions and things like that come from, not because it's something that we are all liking so much that we have to have it, but it's being introduced to us through subliminal messages. It's being saturated into everything we see. It's being put into children to make them a certain way by the time they grow up. And this is the point that I want to make, is that they've been conditioning children to be a certain way since a long time ago, and the adults that we have now are a product of something that's been planned by things like the Tavistock Institute.
Yeah, exactly. And that's also why you correctly connect this to the idea of television and mass media. And so you talk about the fact that television actually has negative health effects on the body and on the psyche, which puts the viewer into an alpha state, which in brainwave speak, that's actually a bad state. It puts you in a suggestible, basically hypnotic zombie state, right. And the flicker rates are actually tuned to be that way on purpose. You can look up those patents for that. That is true. It's not a conspiracy theory.
And so here's kind of a example of technology being coupled with magic, and we were talking about robots. That would be more black magic, but the invention of the television was actually began by a guy named William Crookes, who was a member of the Golden Dawn. And he believed that the spirits of the ether were capable of moving tiny particles around. And so during his inventions of devices, he was trying to measure the existence of electrons, and he invented the Crookes tube, which is actually the first cathode ray tube. And so by firing these electrons at glass, he was hoping that spirits would arrange the particles on the screen and give visions of the other side.
Just like The Ring. The movie The Ring.
The Japanese movie?
Well, I'm talking about the American remake with Naomi Watts.
Uh-huh.
Where the spirits crawl through the TV.
Oh, right. And like Poltergeist too, right?
Yeah, right, yeah.
Yeah, definitely.
I was joking, but... Right, so So what we see is that this is, by design. It's a strategy to basically run. It's a way for the government the establishment to have a perpetual propaganda machine beaming at you in your household, and that's why every household has a TV.
Right.
This was by design, and so you go into some of the subliminal stuff, which I think a lot of people are pretty familiar with that. I won't spend too much time on that, but
and now it's getting so much more sophisticated because
right.
we have the high definition televisions that were all like supposed to be changed by presidential mandate. And so why in the world, if we live in like a free market capitalist kind of business runs everything, why are they like making sure that everyone has these certain types of high definition television?
Right, and then you get into some of the theorists that talk about psyops. Particularly, I want to talk about the MK Ultra discussions by Dr. Jose Delgado, who was involved in implanting electrodes in the brain of the monkeys and different animals, and getting the bulls to charge around by firing different impulses through the electrodes. And Delgado, as well as Dr. Ewan Cameron and others, actually were directly involved in MK Ultra. So this is all very real. So what I always talk about is the fact that MK Ultra is not so much about some programmed assassin as it is the TV set in your living room. That's right. MK Ultra, according to Jose Delgado.
And it's about mind control and population control in a more sophisticated and direct and electronic way. And so, like you said, they would implant certain things and get the behavior that they wanted.
Right. Now, this gets into like electronic frequency manipulation and all that, and that's important because this is real, and it's this is the basis behind the idea of ionospheric manipulation of the atmosphere, right. Geoengineering and so forth, and HARP, and of course we've heard about these terms, bantered about in conspiracy land or whatever. But this is very real, and in terms of like the Schumann resonance, which is the natural frequency of electromagnetic frequency of the Earth, and when you're kind of a normal human walking on the Earth, in the Earth's electromagnetic field, and then the idea, as I understand, kind of going back to Tesla's ideas. I've got a book called Weather Warfare by Jerry Smith. But this gets into all that, and the basic premise here is that you can manipulate these different levels of the the atmosphere, ionosphere, and so forth through beaming different frequencies, ELF, extremely low frequency, and very low BLF frequency waves. I have an essay I wrote on this, Chemtrails Exposed, and where I talk about how this is all aspects of under the umbrella of geoengineering, and it's all very real. What exactly is going on with the spraying may be up for debate. There may be some questions about that. I always recommend the Italian documentary, Chemtrails: The Secret War. It's very well done and cites quite a few real white papers. But so I'm glad to see that you got into this in this chapter of your book. So tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, here's the part I wanted to mention. In a book called Real Magic by Isaac Bonowitz, who actually was the only academically accredited magician from University of California, he talks a lot about extrasensory perception. And this is one form of magic and manipulating, like you said, the electromagnetic frequencies of the earth and also of your brain, right?
Right.
And so he says that basically every human body is a walking radio station broadcasting and receiving on ultra-long wavelengths of the standard electromagnetic energy spectrum. And 99% of all instruction for casting spells, he says, are ways of changing your neural system. So this is kind of where magic meets technology again. And then if you want to get into, or if you want to think about it in psychology way, this is what Jung was talking about with the collective unconscious. So this is the thoughts and frequencies that are out there that are all affecting each other, and we're all of our thoughts are affecting everyone else's thoughts.
Right, and as I understand, there's kind of a crystalline aspect to our cells, if I recall, and they are kind of like little tuning forks, and that's why even Brzezinski in his book Between Two Ages back in 1972 or 3 talked about the reality of the age coming in the technocracy where there would be the ability to manipulate thought patterns and attitudes and the way people acted and behaved based on beaming frequencies at them.
Right.
That's in Brzezinski's book.
And so if a thought has mass, then a thought is, a thing. And so it's not just nothing. It can be quantified, and it can it can bring about larger things. And so you're talking about cymatics. If the world was created by vibrations, by the word, like it says, God spoke the universe into being, right? So our thoughts and vibrations and our words also have the ability to make these effects on reality as well.
Yes, this would of course also be the idea behind why prayer is why it works.
Exactly.
So yeah, completely agree with all that, and I think that's totally on the right track in terms of how we ought to change the way that we think about the world. It's not a random, chaotic, materialistic process. It's all, governed by these higher levels, higher planes,
right.
Spiritual realm.
And so I did kind of put, there's some jokes and some memes in the book and some fun things as well. And so I have a fake ad in there called Zombital. And one of the things that you need for, quote unquote, working magic is emotions, because a thought really doesn't carry a lot unless there's a big emotion behind it. And so that's why they're always trying to keep people in an emotional state and in a less rational state, because this is where people are more easily manipulated by their emotions and not their logical brain. And so when you're giving people all these psychotropic drugs and trying to turn off their emotions, I think this is sorcery, right? And it even goes back to like what you would call pharmakeia or whatever in the ancients. So this is a way of dampening your own conscience and what you feel is being done to you, and why are you depressed? Why do you feel like you need these Prozac and Zoloft and Ambien and all, because you can't identify the true problems that you're facing, and so you just kind of take this to numb you, and that also usurps your magical abilities too.
Interesting, right? So you move on to talk about the psychology incorporated, and this is how marketing, mass media, and so forth are all utilizing these strategies and techniques of basically hoodwinking and tricking people, as well as a kind of almost dark sorceress, necromancy type approach. You talk about Edward Bernays, of course, and you have the quote here about those who manipulate this unseen mechanism of society constitute an invisible government, which is the true ruling power of our country.
Right.
So what's the basic idea here? And I'm glad that you mentioned Freud too, because Freud, of course, comes into play with the manipulation of the libido, the lower, baser desires, and that if you could kind of invert things, you could manage man through the management of his base desires. So tell us about Psychology Incorporated.
Okay, yeah. So the tagline is, "Who has the monopoly on life?" And what I've put here is not every, but a lot of the subsidiaries of Disney, because we talk a lot about Disney. That's pretty much the biggest media conglomerate on the planet and culture creator. So I kind of attack Disney very hard. And you can see that they control magazines, they control movies, they control games, they control Marvel Comics, sports teams, cruise lines, other movie companies that you wouldn't think are linked to Disney, like Miramax and things like that. Touchstone Pictures, ABC, Hollywood Pictures, ABC Sports, A&E. So this is all controlled by Disney. And so what we go into here is, like you said, Sigmund Freud, and then his nephew Edward Bernays, who was the kind of the expert at propaganda.
Right. Who worked with, he changed the title of the Department of War to Department of Defense because that was more Orwellian.
Right.
It sounded better. And so he's basically the government's consultant general on propaganda and manipulation.
And so just like the Tavistock Institute, you think that your culture is your own, created by organic means. It's not. And so you have these people, these sorcerers, I would call them, in places of power and behind the curtain, who are creating propaganda. And so one example was how they came to him and they said, we want women to start smoking cigarettes more.
Right.
And so he said, okay, we're going to have this parade, and we're going to have these women who are like feminist type women who are trying to be independent, and they're going to be smoking cigarettes like torches of liberty or something, and that's going to get women to smoke cigarettes.
Right, and he also saw how, Hollywood could be used for propaganda too.
Right.
Yeah.
And so we talk a lot about egos and super egos, and I have this picture of a baby because Aleister Crowley's whole thing about the Aeon of Horus is the age of the crowned and conquering child, and it's kind of the age of the selfish brat who kind of gets whatever he wants.
Infantilism,
right.
Egoism, childishness,
right.
Immaturity, arrested development.
Never going past the ego to the super ego, which is a more altruistic adult. They're, like you said, they're developmentally arrested in this baby stage, and which is like the millennials and the hipsters. Mm-hmm. And so in one way, they use this to sell products. I mean, sell products of every shape and form, not only for mind control, but, also for capitalism, right? Mm-hmm. And the whole idea of the individual, which was also created by propaganda people.
Right.
And so the whole idea of that the consumer is king, and self-actualization is the way to happiness.
Right. It was the Rand Corporation, actually, that converted the U.S. over to a consumerist nation out of a producing nation.
Right.
And that was all by design. And of course, that's one of the premier think tanks that directly comes out of the Air Force and then is, of course, connected to the CIA. Very much involved in the Cold War, and then in selling the idea of mutually assured destruction, doomsday device, and rational choice theory, game theory, and all this stuff, which is, then it gets into AI and all that. So the Rand Corporation shows you, for example, like with Alex Abea's book, Soldiers of Reason, that this stuff is from the top down. You think Josie and the Pussycats is a stupid movie that, shows culture creation on the part of the establishment, even in terms of the fads, and you think that that's ridiculous, well, you are not aware of the Rand Corporation.
Mm-hmm. And so when they're telling you to actualize your inner self, that's kind of a moot point, because you can't do that, because everything that you have been given and taught and seen is from a corporation such as Disney.
Right.
And so that's kind of why I put in the this part about the Monopoly game. It was not before that came out, the word monopoly was a negative thing, right? It wasn't a good thing to have a monopoly on power or water or real estate or whatever. And so they actually created this game that was called the Landlord's Game as a cautionary tale to show you how futile and aggravating it is to try and play Monopoly. And so,
like Operation.
Yeah. And so, today the most powerful, monopoly on culture creation, I would say again, would be Walt Disney, because, from cradle to grave, you can, Disney is there for every stage of your life, and even goes to as far as you can have your wedding at Disneyland, you can,
Well, it's a completely synthetic world.
Right. And so, I mean, even learning how to read. So, when I was a little kid, I had these See and Say, like, records that you put on with the little book.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like when you hear the tone, turn the page, right? And they were all Disney. And so I'm sitting there teaching myself how to read, but I'm reading Three Little Pigs, Mickey Mouse, Sleeping Beauty, Cinderella, all of these tales and things that this one corporation wants you to be thinking about instead of getting a broader perspective of the entire world.
Right, and I like that you pointed out the illusion of choice. So in 1983, 90% of American media was owned by 50 different companies, and then as of 2011, that was down to 6: GE, News Corp, Disney, Viacom, Time Warner, and CBS. So you're wondering why you get one message across media and how media manipulation and fakery could be coordinated. Well, that's how, right there.
Right. And so we kind of go on to talk about where do these things come from? Where do all these corporate products come from? They are created by slavery, right? Because they're outsourced to different countries where the labor is very cheap and they can abuse the people as much as they want.
And that was done by design.
Right.
The outsourcing as a plot and strategy of globalism by the Royal Society was done by design.
And so here's kind of an interesting point that I was making. So a couple years ago when I was writing this, when you would go to Target and Walmart or wherever, these big box stores, they would clearly have defined aisles for girls and boys, and everything for girls was Pink Princess, stuff like that.
Right.
And everything for boys was Warriors and Hot Wheels and Macho Men and wrestlers and stuff like that. But now, like, just within the past maybe year or so, they are switching from this what I call princess warrior programming. They're going into the next phase, which is the hermaphroditic, genderless. There is no more girls and boys.
Boys play with dolls now.
Right, there is no more girls and boys, and so they're kind of going gender neutral with the whole thing.
Yes, and the corporations, some might say, oh well, they're just reflecting the attitudes of the people. No, it's not just that, because a lot of this stuff is planned and strategized again by these think tanks. It's intended to condition the children, not just be a reflection of what people want.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, all these mass-produced toys, definitely, in my opinion, are a form of propaganda and mind control and conditioning men to be ready for military service and conditioning women to be narcissists who will allow this.
Now, yeah, so this is going to get into, I think, what do you call it? Bitchcraft, is that?
Oh, that's in the next one.
Okay,
Yeah.
Well, so you go on to talk about Disney and Disneyland and Club 33, and I think most people are probably familiar with that, so we won't go.
Yeah, more of what I'm talking about here is Walt Disney's personal character, because he is he kind of has carte blanche in American homes as some kind of paragon of innocence and childhood and something that you could never find fault in, because everyone loves Walt Disney, right? But when you look at his character, he was a very tormented person. He didn't know who his real birth parents were. He would use his time in the military to, he would go and collect battlefield relics and paint them up and put fake blood on them and sell them for profit, as fake mementos of war. He worked for the FBI.
Well, this is another thing. He was very much involved in wartime propaganda.
Right.
So people ask all the time, like, how do you get that there's such a big connection between the military-industrial complex and Hollywood, or Hollywood and the CIA? Well, you need to look no further than Disney itself, which was hugely involved in World War II propaganda.
Right. Well, actually, the day after Pearl Harbor, he arrived to his studio in Burbank to find it had already been commandeered by the military as a propaganda producing machine. And so this is one way that he kind of had no choice, but he did go along with it. And so he produced instructional videos. He produced propaganda videos that showed Donald Duck joining the military.
Right, Donald's kind of like the image of the idiot
right.
guy who joins the military,
right.
and Scrooge McDuck is the banker.
Mm-hmm. So Donald is, the everyday man, and also to pay taxes. And so this is something that not a lot of people know, is that before World War II, not a lot of people were paying federal income tax because it wasn't like a thing yet. And so they made this cartoon called The New Spirit, where Donald actually is shown filling out his tax form, and he has this motto, taxes to beat the Axis. And it shows you the whole process of him putting his income and getting his refund and how he's going to spend it. But actually this really got a lot of people to go pay their taxes in a way that not I think it worked in
well, it's
more.
patriotic. You got to fight the evil boogeyman out there.
And not only that, so there was shows about Minnie Mouse saving her grease to make ammunitions, and I mean, just if you watch them, they're really creepy because the guns come alive and the bombs have faces, and they're bombing the entire world and flying over. I think one was called Wings to Victory, where it showed the entire world with the air being taken over by the Air Force, which Walt Disney, one of the pictures in there that I included was his own hand drawing the Mickey Mouse ears inside of an inverted pentagram, which I found was really weird. But Walt Disney also had connections with Nazis like Werner von Braun. He was interested in rocketry, and so then you get into things like...
Well, I think that was probably why this is why there's the connections to the moon situation and Stanley Kubrick.
Mm-hmm. And what was I going to say? Disney... Oh, Tomorrowland. Okay, so then you have Disneyland starting to partner up with all these military industrial corporations like Monsanto and Siemens and Kodak, and all these big companies that produce weapons and other things for warfare. Is what Disneyland is all about, really, is conditioning people to accept that, warfare is part of...
It's a conversion machine for the military-industrial complex.
Exactly.
To convert you over to it, to believe in it as a bastion of civilization or whatever. So then you go on to talk about a whole bunch of other corporations and how they tie into the mass media complex, and more about Hollywood, Bush, and so forth. But you have a section where you talk about some of the Kabbalistic and esoteric aspects of this. Why did you situate this sort of Kabbalistic, esoteric stuff in the midst of, like you talk about 9 and 11, in the midst of all this corporate stuff?
Because I kind of wanted to make a point that these things like 9/11 is the biggest one I can think of. It wasn't just a terrorist attack. This, judging by the numerology, Crowley said that 9 and 11 were the most magical and satanic numbers. If you go to Anton LaVey's book, The Satanic Bible, he will tell you over and over again that 9 is the most satanic number because of the way that it reduces, always reduces back into itself, so it's a selfish and satanic number. And so these people who are behind things like 9/11 are without a doubt using these techniques of sorcery to enchant people and to as a form of mind control and terrorism as well.
Right, and I think you're correct here, and you kind of touch on some of the stuff that William Ramsey talks about in his book of Crowley and the New World Order and 9/11.
And so I kind of put this picture, and it says the 20th century 666 because gematria, how do you say it?
Gematria.
is a part of magic, definitely. And in English gematria, the letters FONX equals 666, and so that's why
FONX.
FOX.
Oh, and X.
Yeah.
Okay.
So that's why you've
so
got
Fonks.
Fox Pictures, like Lucius Fox. You've got Fox Theaters. Like a lot of times when you'll see an old-timey theater, it's going to be called Fox Theater. So all of these things that equal 666, because one of Crowley's outcomes that he would want for the world was to bring out the beast, right? He thought of himself as the great beast, and he wanted everyone to live in their animal nature, in this like Darwinian idea that we're all just predators on the food chain, and that there's no such thing as right and wrong, only strong and weak.
Yes. Now, so then you go into a section on comic books. Why did you include comic books in here?
Just because there's so much in comic books that comes out, like one example was Sandy Hook. So you've got the guy who did the map for the Batman, the Dark Knight.
Right.
You've got Sandy Hook is listed as strike zone number 1 right here in the movie.
Right.
So there's a lot of predictive programming that comes out in comic books, and also I think that the whole idea of comic book heroes is part of the warrior programming agenda for military service as well. So you've got men wanting to be heroes, and that's what they think they're doing by joining the military, but when they get there, it's something completely different.
I like too that you got into the media fakery with Robbie Parker and Sandy Hook, and that there's a chapter on all that in the book. So that was good. You mentioned Spawn, which is funny because I used to read Spawn. That's one of the worst movies I've ever seen.
Yeah, I don't think a lot of people were talking about Sandy Hook as a faked event before this, but I definitely always had my questions about it, just because like, how could this little guy, little Adam Lanza, like kick down this door and kill all these people and carry all these weapons and everything that they reported that he had been doing. It just didn't feel right to me. And then he had like some strange family connections. His dad, I think, was like worked for DARPA.
Yeah, some of that was true. He was involved in writing algorithmic programmings that would track and catch problems in flash trades, but I don't think that it was true that he was directly connected to DARPA, if I recall. But I mean, there's some weird stuff going on there for sure. But yeah, I like that you included a chapter on Sandy Hook and all the nonsense. You even mentioned the movie Wag the Dog, and how Wag the Dog shows the creation of these kinds of events through Hollywood and through CGI and editing and all that. So that is about 40 minutes on the first book. So we'll conclude with that, and that's Operation Culture Creation Part 1. So you guys can definitely purchase that at the link below. And next we're going to talk about Operation Culture Creation Part 2. So you did Part 1, you had fun, you got, I guess, a good response on that. So tell us what prompted Part 2.
Okay, so Part 2 is a continuation of kind of the story of the life of the average American child. And so this is kind of them in their teenage formative years, the decision making, like puberty.
So the people that were kids at the time of Part 1 have moved up into the age of and so here you have your full-blown princess, this is the period from puberty to adulthood is kind of what I'm talking about. Okay.
And on the cover you've got this princess who is
looking at herself.
She's looking in a mirror, but it's not her reflection. It's kind of the, what did he call it? The
shade?
No, it's actually from Snow White.
Oh, the kind of dark mask from. I know what you're talking about.
Yeah.
But I don't remember the name.
Yeah, I wish I could. That's kind of lame of me to forget that, but it has a weird name. But yeah, so she's looking in the mirror, and it's not her. It's just this, the mask from the mirror.
Kind of dark, empty visage.
Yes. The slave in the mirror. Okay, that's why it was important, because we're going to be talking about trauma-based mind control slaves.
Okay.
And so what this is called is the slave in the mirror. And so she's this kind of princess who is not happy, and one of her obsessions is
this is like
death.
the chicks on the MTV show My Sweet 16.
Exactly.
Right.
And so the male counterpart, he is just kind of like a faceless warrior.
This is the guy who went to Iraq and is now on a bunch of antidepressants and suicidal.
Right. He's like Black Ops, and he was probably a quarterback, and then he joined the military. And
now he's miserable because, yeah.
Exactly. And so the first chapter is all about the mystery religions that are coming back into light, even though the people who have been propagating these things are kind of stay in the shadow. Right now, we're learning that through like the revelation of the method, they're going to be wanting to practice their religions openly, and so they're introducing these things to popular culture to get people ready for accepting these types of thought.
Okay, and so we start here. You talk about the Bavarian Illuminati, which is this kind of Enlightenment era sect that was interested in. Everybody's heard about the Illuminati, but I like that you cite Terry Melanson's book, which is pretty scholarly treatment of it. That they were pretty much communists of their day.
Yeah, and so if you read this, you kind of get a feeling that, he wasn't that bad of a guy. I mean, he was kind of for equal rights for women. He was for abolishing monarchy. He was for...
he was the communist of his day. Exactly.
And so if you start to read these writings, you might actually, start to agree with Adam Weishaupt a little bit. I mean... Maybe not you, but...
well, it has this kind of... it sounds good. Like, let's all be fair, and let's all make everything equal, and everything should be rational, and so forth. But I don't think that that's ultimately what it leads to.
No. And also he was, like, involved in recruiting ex-Jesuits, and he was also, like, switching religions a lot. But basically... their whole idea was like the end justifies the means, and so whatever they have to do to get the world the way that they want it, they will do it. So if that means killing whoever, they'll do it. Subverting whoever, they'll do it. So it was just kind of like a moral gray area, and so even though some of his writings sound sane, they were willing to use whatever skullduggery they had to obtain their goals.
And it kind of branched out into using Masonic lodges.
Exactly.
And this is how Masonry became sort of this international revolutionary force.
Right. And so, yeah, I think this has all happened in, like, 1777 is when they merged the Adam Weishaupt's Illuminati with the Masonry.
Various lodges. Okay, well, so yeah, you've got a pretty extensive chapter on that, which I enjoy the attention to detail that you have there, and you talk about.
Okay, and so yeah, then we talk about Freemasonry in itself, and how when you read Morals and Dogma, what they're talking about is Lucifer, right, and the light of Lucifer, and
which is supposed to bring you enlightenment, right?
And so even Manly P. Hall has this quote in here about, it says, when the Mason learns that the key to the warrior on the block is the proper application of the dynamo of living power, he has learned the mystery of his craft. The seething energies of Lucifer are in his hands, and before he may step onward and upward, he must prove his ability to properly apply energy. So I think Lucifer is mentioned like more than 50 times in morals and dogma. And so this is kind of like the light. And Illuminati, that's another light worshipping kind of cult, right? And so this is like something that I'm going over is like, what is this light that they're all talking about? Because even in Kabbalah, the light, the Ein Sof or whatever, that is also about light. And so this chapter is all about light and the mystery religions.
Right, and I think that it's what Paul said, that the devil appears as an angel of light. And it's all quite curious that it's mirrors exactly what the angel of light, Lucifer, Satan, said in the Garden of Eden, that I'll make you a god if you listen to what I say. You'll be your own god.
Right.
Knowing and determining good and evil. So that's the problem here, is that all these things kind of blend into the same situation of you being your own god and you decide what's wrong and right.
Right. And so that's kind of at the end of the chapter we talk about the OTO. They think of themselves as the merging of Illuminati and Thelema and
Advanced
masonry
right.
and sex magic and all this stuff. And so we go...
So it's kind of just a hodgepodge, sort of blending everything together, different religious traditions. Let's talk about, you've got a section on symbology, which is, I think, worth noting. I mean, some of this may be old hat to people, but it's always good, I think, to kind of go back and refresh yourself and talk about some of this stuff. So you talk about some of these kind of archetypal patterns and symbols that we see all the time, like the phoenix or the eye or the skull and the bones and the 322 or the blazing star. What do you refresh us on some of this?
Okay.
What is the purpose of what's the esoteric meaning of the phoenix?
All right. Well, what I'm trying to prove here is that no matter what you see, it's always got an esoteric meaning. So you see like phoenix pictures, like you said, the phoenix, and so this is like probably the most popular symbol of the mystery schools, and it's just like a symbol of eternal death and resurrection, because it's the bird that when it dies, it turns into flames and it's reborn again. Right.
It's also an image of immortality or resurrection.
And so then you've got phoenix pictures, right? And then every type of nothing is ever done by accident. So here I have a example of Mariah Carey's album Rainbow, and the rainbow has a deep esoteric meaning that goes back to theosophy and like the 7 rays of the masters, and theosophy was something that was created to destroy Christianity. And
which again we're back to the principle of Lucifer, the light bearer, which is light is of course all the 7 rays blended into one.
Right. And so you even in masonry you have rainbow girls for little girls. And so then we kind of talk about things like leopard print. And so this is something that in ancient Egypt only certain priests and magicians could wear a leopard skin. And so this is another example of like, why are these things are made fashionable? It's not because it's good. It's because there's a secret esoteric meaning behind it. Right?
Tell us about the Wajat, the eye.
Well, it's just kind of goes back to Horus, right? And I think, wasn't it like it was torn out by Set, and then it became a god on its own. And you're gonna see, this one eye. I think that's been done like a lot, and then like together with the eye in the pyramid. But definitely the one eye is a really deep esoteric symbol you could talk about for a long time. But it really, in my opinion, in popular culture, it just goes back to the Aeon of Horus.
What about the cube and the platonic solids?
So the cube in masonry is you're known as a rough ashlar, which is like not a perfect cube until you are raised in masonry, and then you are made a perfect cube. And you're going to see cubes used all around, like in Hellraiser or like in Transformers, that cube, right? And the cube also has to do with Saturn as well.
Right. That's all true.
Yeah.
All right. So, Operation Culture Creation Book 2. So, let's talk about some of the themes that you get into in movies in this chapter on the mothers and the missing mother.
Okay.
So you have a list of a whole bunch of movies where the mother dies or is missing. What do you make of that?
Yeah, so this chapter is called Earth Needs Mothers, and so in my opinion, in the Christian Trinity, I think the Holy Spirit has a feminine principle. And so I think that by always killing the mother in these movies like Bambi and, well, I mean, name your Disney movie. I mean, this is even a mainstream people are now talking about why do none of these princesses have a mom. They remove the woman in her power phase, in her full moon phase, and actually kill her. And so the death of the mother is very traumatizing. It's probably the most traumatizing thing that can happen to you. And even the Nazis, when they would, Hitler's youth and things like that, they would try and separate the child from the mother early on as possible, because this is where you learn things like empathy and nurturing and...
Mm-hmm. Yeah, some of the nobility have been known to do this before as well, to teach the children not to be dependent.
Mm-hmm. And
but it kind of creates a kind of psychopathy.
And now that I mention it, like every time you watch a movie now, look how many times that the death of the mother is shown, or that the kids are an orphan. It's just like, it's too many times to be coincidence. It's like, I think it's like statistically impossible for this not to be a spiritual thing.
Mm-hmm. Let's talk about Project Crazy Bitch. This chapter I really enjoyed because it's very applicable to feminism and the progression of the person that's gone from the Miley Cyrus kid era of Disney into now being a crazy bitch.
Mm-hmm.
And that's by design to bring you into this narcissistic crazy state.
Right. And so where I start out here is the princess programming. And so you'll notice that around the year 2000, Disney tried to heavily market its princesses apart from the movies that were coming out, and have the princess line be its own thing. And I think no one's going to argue with me that this princess thing has got really out of hand. I don't know if it's transitioning now, because these books are kind of like a couple years old, and we're kind of going into a different phase, like we said, with the genderless and stuff like that. But definitely the girls who are maturing today were raised on this princess programming. And
well, I just showed you the other day that Disney thing of Sophia and those kids.
Oh, yeah. So it's not died out yet, right? And so here's kind of what we're talking about is this is seriously a psychological problem that they are creating in women, is this narcissism and inflated sense of self-worth to the point of grandiosity and I deserve everything. Everyone is subservient to me. I'm the princess. I'm the only princess. And this is creating really dark psychopathic women who have no empathy and nurturing and all those feminine qualities that we need to keep the human race in love. But this is the princess that will see the
more like Maleficent, right?
Yeah, but then that's interesting, because in the movie Maleficent, she's made out to be the good guy. Remember that, the one with Angelina
what I got
Jolie?
from that movie was that all the men are weak and evil, and girl power.
And so here's the feminine side of the overinflating of the ego to the point of like being psychotic about it. And so you're not like a nurturing, caring woman anymore. You're a crazy bitch because you expect that the whole world is supposed to bow down to you. And this is part of the royalty programming that I talk about too, like the next wave royal invasion. So you had the British invasion by the Beatles, and then you have this whole like princess programming, paying attention to the royal wedding, even though it has nothing to do with your life, trying to be like
yeah, all the tabloids in the U.S. and Fox News are trying to tell us that we need to be concerned with the British aristocracy.
Right, and so this is the kind of like class stratification that they are wanting with like two class world with the elite and the lowly, and you're gonna want to be part of the royal family. You don't want to be the servant, and so you might as well be the princess, right? And then so you have this examples in things like My Super Sweet 16, the MTV show, where they're like all spoiled brats, and they make a big deal about who to invite to the party and who not, and then they kind of like take this weird pride in watching people get disappointed about not being able to come to the party. And then we talk about consumerism as bitchcraft, and this is actually something that I took from Anton LaVey.
What does he say about this?
He is talking about how to use your sexuality and your good looks to enchant men and get them to serve you, just like a sorcerer would do. And so using this pink, using like juicy, words like juicy couture and
sort of the Victoria's Secret everywhere for like even young girls.
Right. And so then you have these dolls coming out like Monster High, who just look like tarts, right? They don't look like dolls for girls. They look...
Or the Bratz.
And then you have... when she grows up, she's a Bridezilla. Right?
Right.
So...
Okay, well, we're coming close to an hour here, the first hour, and we're going to finish up in the second hour with trauma-based mind control through film, and how film can be actually a mechanism for traumatizing people on a mass scale, mass level, to further condition them into the system. And then we're going to get into more of the warrior programming for males, for military service and so forth, and the notion of the hero and how that's engineered and manufactured. And then we're going to talk about Hollywood Mind Control, your most latest book, and that will all be in the second hour. So you're listening to the first free hour of Jay's Analysis, Esoteric Hollywood with Jamie Hanshaw, and you can purchase her books at the links below and at Jay's Analysis and at Freeman TV under the Weird Stuff section. You can also subscribe to Jay's Analysis podcast for my lectures, talks, and interviews and podcasts at jaysanalysis.com at the PayPal link. Thank you for listening. Welcome back. You're listening to Esoteric Hollywood. We're talking with Jamie Hanshaw, the author of Operation Culture Creation Part 1 and 2 and Hollywood Mind Control. In this next hour, we're going to be talking about the second half of Part 2, Operation Culture Creation Part 2. So, Jamie, you have a chapter as we move on talking about trauma-based mind control and mass culture. So, kind of give us maybe an overview of what this is about and where you're drawing from here.
Okay. So this was probably the hardest chapter I ever had to write, but it really is the heart of the entire issue, and it's a very hard pill for people to swallow, trauma-based mind control. So this is something, in my opinion, that happens to specific victims, and then it kind of trickles down and happens to society as a whole. And in the beginning of this chapter, I start talking about children's movies and how extremely traumatic. Most of them are. I have examples of The Lion King where he loses his father, right? His father dies in front of him.
Or Willy Wonka.
Willy Wonka. You have Dumbo, who loses his mother, and it's a very, very sad scene. I mean, for anybody to watch, they would get choked up. You have Nemo's mother getting killed. You have Littlefoot's mother from Land Before Time getting killed in front of him. You have Bambi. That's a perfect example of killing the mother in front of him. You have Old Yeller, where he actually has to shoot his own dog, and that's part of a trauma-based mind control we can talk about in a second. But in this chapter, I use the example of the first movie I ever saw in the theater was Land Before Time. And my neighbor took me to watch it, and so I was totally transfixed on this giant screen, and it's a Spielberg-Lucas production, I think.
Yeah, I remember it.
Mm-hmm. And from, beginning to end, I was just, like, totally hypnotized by this enchanting cartoon on the big screen. And in the particular scene where Littlefoot's mother has to fight the T-Rex and she dies, and then he's coming up to her as she's dying, and they're both crying, and she's saying, you have to go on without me. As a little child, I was, like, devastated by this scene. And it stuck with me my entire life. And even to the point where when I got home, I had to beg my parents to go buy me a Littlefoot plush doll, because I felt like part of me had lived this experience, and I had to take this orphan under my wing and nurture him because he had lost his mother, and I witnessed that, so I was a part of it. So this is not just a strategy to sell plush toys to little kids as another means of income, but this is actually what we call trauma-based mind control. And so we talk about, in the beginning, after World War II, they had perfected this technique to get people's minds to fracture in a post-traumatic stress disorder type of way. And when they witness trauma or they go through traumatic events, their mind fragments. And then, so what they did in the concentration camps and what the scientists and were trying to create was a perfectly programmable person, a human robot, like we were talking about sorcerers and robots, right? That they could use to carry out different tasks. And so they create altars in people, and then they program the different altars to be different kinds of people, and based on their brainwave patterns. And so you have beta altars, beta kitten altars. So this is where kitten imagery comes in a lot in popular culture, is a sex slave. Then you have a delta altar, which would be like a super soldier assassin altar, and then it goes down the line from there. But then even deeper after the MK Ultra was the Project Monarch, where they were recruiting children from multi-generational, like, satanic and incest abused families to be monarch mind control slaves. And so this is where you see the monarch butterfly is so prolific in popular culture, and whenever you see that put upon somebody, you know that this is probably someone who's been going through this type of trauma-based mind control monarch programming, right? And so they actually got the idea from the monarch butterflies, because they pass on genetic memory to their offspring, because no one butterfly can make the migration from Mexico to Canada. And they figured out that these memories and these abilities of the mind can be transferred genetically from parents to children. And so Project Monarch is what we talk about a lot.
Okay, well, so you talk about slavery, and I know that, I've talked at times, there's a good documentary about if people have a hard time, conceiving of this as in any way possible, you could look at the way that sex espionage works, which is a real thing, where you have to take people who have been purposefully degraded, who are then willing to be sex operatives for, the purpose of blackmail or for the purpose of working for some intelligence agency. You know, there's plenty of stories about this that I think are true. And if you watch the documentary on Stalin's NKVD and sex operatives, I forget the exact name of it, but you can find it on YouTube or Vimeo or somewhere. It discusses this process of turning them into programmed sex slaves. So, and we know that human trafficking and sex slavery is real. So, you know, I don't doubt that this has been involved. You know, when we look at many of the cases of situations like, you know, the Franklin scandal or Savile, things like that, point in that direction. But
and so this is why you see many of the pop stars having alter egos. You have Eminem being also Slim Shady. You have David Bowie being also Ziggy Stardust. You have Nicki Minaj also having alter personalities. And so this is something that is coming out into the mainstream in an artistic way. And I think even Lady Gaga has a good quote in my book. I put in there from her video Marry the Night, where she's being wheeled around on a gurney through these halls of a high-class hospital. And she's saying that I replace memories with the things that I like, and I loathe reality, and, you know, things aren't always what they seem. And so this is kind of a cloaked admission that she was probably, you know, programmed in some way by these mind control doctors like Jose Delgado and the ones that we were talking about before. Not that she was programmed by him, but this is the beginnings of...
well, certainly handlers will degrade the person, and, you know, that's reportedly what was going on with Marilyn Monroe, is that she was kind of kept in her house arrest. And, you know, we've read this about many of the Hollywood stars, and that they're, you know, what do you call them, the rehab facilities. Right. You know, that's all very possible. You know,
and I have a section in there about Marilyn Monroe because, in my opinion, she was probably one of the first presidential model mind control slaves.
Well, she did appear to be the sexual servant of Sinatra and JFK.
Right.
So.
And his brother, too.
Right. And probably a lot of other people.
Mm-hmm. So anybody who's looking for kind of a introductory article on trauma-based mind control, I mean, there's many books and references and scholarly psychotherapy work, books being written about these people who are multiple personalities. I would recommend this chapter as just to get a brief overview of the entire thing, because it even goes as deep as when they are creating the altars, some of the altars can actually be demon-possessed, too.
Yeah, I don't doubt any of that. I just wonder how easily the mechanics of it can be controlled, because, you know, as we've talked about before, you know, humans are... there's a lot of room for contingency, and so, you know, how do you really know what these altars are going to do,
right.
And how do you really control this with a specific image or something?
They can't control it, and that's why I think a lot of them have these psychological meltdowns that we see, like Amanda Bynes or Britney Spears or somebody like that, is they're attempting to break their programming, and so that's why they have to go to rehab and get a tune-up.
Entirely possible, and certainly it's not beyond the realm of possibility given the tie-in of the intelligence agencies and the military with Hollywood. So very, very possible, but I also think there's a lot of marketing and theatrics involved in this too. So, for example, having an alter identity is good for business because it allows me to take on a different persona as an entertainer, so that I'm not limited to the boredom of just being, you know, pop star XYZ.
Well, certainly not every entertainer who has an alter personality is a monarch victim, but that's why we have to look at all the different signs and symbols that are put on them. So if you see somebody who has a multiple personality and they're also using the butterfly imagery a lot, they are propelled to the top of their field very quickly, such as like a Katy Perry or a Beyonce or somebody like that. So we'll get into that in Hollywood Mind Control a little bit more, but it's a lot of symbols that you have to put together to say, yes, this person has probably almost or most likely a monarch mind control victim.
Well, but I mean, given the fact that there's plenty of people willing to degrade themselves and be, for example, prostitutes or sex workers, why do you need mind control slaves? There's plenty of people willing to become Katy Perry for $20 million a year.
Well, but I think that they're being initiated into darker and darker things.
Well, I think that's true. Yeah.
The more they stay in it.
So do you think there's like stages of degradation that you have to go through?
Oh, definitely. And depending on what you're willing to do, that's how far you can get in the business.
Okay. So the next chapter is monarchs, zombies, and rock and roll. What's your idea here? This is where you step more into the music industry.
Uh-huh. So here we are talking about the beginning of rock and roll in itself, and it actually has a story that is connected to voodoo because of Robert Johnson.
Mm-hmm.
And he is an interesting story because at first they said that he didn't know how to play guitar whatsoever until he started hanging out with this guy and they would play in the cemeteries. And then there's that famous story where he sold his soul to the devil at the crossroads, and then he was able to play guitar like no one else, right?
Yeah, but it kind of sounds like a story that somebody would tell.
It does. It does. But it's interesting because this music has roots in jazz and African drum beats and things like that.
Yeah, voodoo, right.
Right. And so voodoo, is a big part of rock and roll in my opinion.
Well, yeah, no, that's absolutely true.
Because, the drum beats that they would use are actually each specific Loa or Orisha in Santeria has their own drum beat that they play to bring the god to earth,
right,
and possess the people that are worshiping. And so rock and roll definitely has this ability to possess people, and it's not just
yeah, and it definitely unleashes an energy of force. This is what we see at concerts and so forth, and music absolutely sort of comes right out of the ether or the psychosphere and affects us in a profound way.
And it's interesting too because voodoo comes from Africa, where it's known as the slave coast, and so here we're talking about slaves again.
Mm-hmm.
And so this was kind of their only defense against what was being done to them is to take their voodoo religion and try and enact some kind of revenge against their slave handlers.
So you're saying that the rise of that if curses and stuff is a result of like rebellion against slave handlers?
Yes.
I don't you think it goes back beyond that, though?
It really does, but in the modern times and definitely in the colonial period, this was their primitive ancestral religion that was antithesis. How do you say that? Antithesis.
Antithesis?
Yeah, to their slave handlers who would consider themselves Christian.
Now, I've talked several times about the connection between this kind of stuff and voodoo, particularly the principles of big pharma and pharmakia and doping everybody up with all these pharmaceuticals, and how this is actually the old school approach of what the Vodun would do with giving people the poison of the blowfish to turn them into a zombie.
Right.
And what all that was the poison that the blowfish had, making you think that you had died, and then through the influence of the drugs, you believe that you're under the power of the shaman.
Mm-hmm. And so this is kind of a point that I try to make too, is this whole zombie meme and the zombification of people
right.
is heavily propagated by rock and roll music and what we are seeing coming out in the pop stars today.
Now, you talk about cult leaders. Now, why do you stick cult leaders in this section? What's your...
I'm talking about rock stars as cult leaders because this is a new form of worship. You know, it has replaced religion in a lot of ways. People think of rock and roll as a religion, and so one of my examples is Elvis. You know, everyone loves Elvis, and he was definitely an enigmatic character who, if you read his story, he had a lot of interesting things going on around his life. He was born under a blue light, and he thought that he was some kind of messiah. He was very heavily interested in the occult and theosophy. He wouldn't go anywhere without his trunk of books by Blavatsky and Manly P. Hall. And
yeah, a lot of people don't know that about Elvis, right?
And he actually thought that he could make miracles, and even the people around him believed in him like that, like he was a sort of godlike being.
Now, Elvis also has this military-industrial complex connection with his handler in the military and being in all these movies after his military service. So I've always wondered if there wasn't a connection there.
Yeah, definitely. And what was I going to say about
Wasn't his manager like some military guy?
He was a colonel. Yeah, definitely.
Right. Now, so you're saying essentially that the way that Elvis is viewed is kind of like a god, and that maybe Elvis is using voodoo.
Well, in a way, and then now we have Beyonce, who's pretty much the biggest female pop star on the planet, and she has this kind of satirical, non-satirical church forming up around her called the Church of Fae.
Well, we'll get into that when we get into the next book and its section on Beyonce and all the Hollywood mind control stuff. But so the last chapter, tell us a little bit about Program for War. What's this about, and why did you include that in Culture Creation 2? So is this the sequel to what you were saying about the young boys in part 1?
Yeah, definitely. And this is the male counterpart to Project Crazy Bitch.
Okay.
So this is what they have planned for young men. And so what I start out by is the point that I wanted to make is that human beings in their natural state are pretty averse to killing each other, and it has to take a lot of programming and trauma and breaking down of the psyche to get people to actually kill each other. And video games is a big part of that.
Desensitization.
Exactly. And so talk about all these studies that they would do, because even when the men would fire their guns, they would intentionally fire over, or they would, not fire at all. And so they would have to, the drill sergeant would have to actually go up and down the line and get people to shoot straight and shoot at the enemy, because human beings are made of love.
Well, this is
in
why
my opinion.
They developed the first-person shooter.
Right.
But the Pentagon did.
Right. And so they have spent an incredible time and effort into making men desensitized to killing, and things like G.I. Joe and Batman and the Dark Hero and all this stuff. And so this is a point that I think goes over a lot of people's heads. They think human beings are violent, murderous, greedy, bloodthirsty beings, but they're actually not. They have been through so much trauma.
Well, they need to. They're trying to make people into that.
Exactly. It's not their natural state whatsoever, and this is a secret. I think if everybody could get a grasp on it, it would make them see their fellow man in a lot different way.
Well, and that's the whole mythology of Darwinism, is that we're just animals and we're predators, and the highest calling is basically to be a predatory viper against all your other fellow humans. And that's the reason why Darwinism is so self-destructive.
Right. And so there's a really good book that I cite in here. It's called On Killing, and by a lieutenant colonel actually wrote this, and he's talking about the entertainment industry utilizing things to make boys into more efficient and desensitized killers, and sports is definitely a big part of this, and so is video games and R-rated movies. And so if you think about it, like, how many people have you ever seen killed? I've never seen anyone killed. But if you would look at television, and this thing called mean world syndrome comes about, where you think that the world is a much worse place than it actually is.
Yes, that's a great point. Right, yeah, and you know, they say that by the time of, I don't know, teenage years or whatever, children have seen several thousand deaths simulated on television and video games.
Right, and this doesn't reflect real life whatsoever, because hardly any of us have ever seen any kind of violence like that.
So what is this section about the heroes and the propaganda and Superman? What are you getting at here?
Let's see. Yeah, so Hitler was very interested in creating the perfect super soldier, and the Supermen.
The Übermensch.
Right, but that also goes back to his studies of theosophy and the supermen of the Himalayas.
Well, this whole idea
the
of the Norse gods and the Great White Brotherhood.
Exactly.
And all that,
yeah, so this is kind of where Superman came from, is this idea that these hidden masters are manipulating humanity and using occult people like Madame Blavatsky to take control back of the human race and eradicate Christianity altogether. And then we have a section here about public education plus sports equals warfare. And
now this is important and very relevant, yes, because this is the god of our age, is sports.
Mm-hmm. And so that's pretty much the apex of your high school career is if you can be a sports hero,
yes,
right? Or a cheerleader. And in my opinion,
simulated warfare.
Right, sports is simulated warfare, and so it's just a practice for boot camp where they are reduced to their lowest common denominator, and they learn how to just believe, obey, and fight. You know, just listen to the coach and get out there and win, right, at all costs.
Win at all costs, yeah.
And so another point I was trying to make in here is that not only is this kind of detrimental to the men, but also to the girls, because what is the prized position in a high school girl career is the head cheerleader.
Yeah.
Or, you know, the prom queen, which is actually May Queen, right? That's a pagan fertility rite. But this is so detrimental because, you know, the cheerleader really has no role in society, and even if they wanted to take it to being a professional cheerleader, those girls don't even make money at all. They'll make maybe like $75 a game or like $1,000 a game, you know, at the very, very high end, whereas the male counterpart, you know, the football star will make millions and millions and millions of dollars, but the cheerleader is just there to be lusted after and be used as kind of bait for the males. And so in this chapter, I kind of talk about them using sexuality again to condition men to want to go to war for their princess or their cheerleader and be a hero in the eyes of women. And so I kind of use these posters from...
Well, these are real old propaganda posters.
Yeah, from Walt Disney, and we were talking about Donald Duck joining the army. Mm-hmm. And in the one where he actually joins the army, he does it because he sees pretty nurses and pretty hostesses and you know, men in uniform with a girl on each arm saying join the Air Corps and you're going to get lots of chicks. And so this is something that the sorcerers know really well, is that, you know, men, whatever men do is because they want to get a girl.
Yeah, just manipulation of the most basic desires, and everybody falls for it, right?
And then, so we go in to talk about the military occult complex, and so this is something that you wouldn't really put together, but since the beginning of time, sorcery and magic have been used for warfare. And,
human sacrifice.
Right, that's true too. And so you talk about, like, them consulting the Oracle of Delphi for advice on battles, and kings using... magic figurines as the battle goes on, where they would have a tiny battlefield and try and influence the outcome in a magical way. And then you have
John D.
These patches I put in here because it kind of shows you that the military is very occultic. You know, this one has like a Molech bull holding a 66
Route 66.
Yeah, and it's a military patch. And then you have one that's like Pan, and I talk a lot about Pan and the OTO. And then just all the occultic looking military badges that they use. And so, and then there's this part about men who stare at goats and how they would use New Age teachings and things like "Be all you can be" is a slogan that came out of what's that called?
First Earth Battalion?
Yes.
Yeah.
First Earth Battalion. And then they use subliminal messaging, and they use the military at the pro sports games. I mean, if you go to a pro sports game, the whole thing is an advertisement for the military, right? Even to the point of having the jets fly overhead and saluting the troops and having...
Well, Katy Perry does that whole video where she becomes a troop.
Part of me. Yeah. Yep. Definitely.
And then, of course, Katy Perry plays all the Super Bowl crap. So.
Right. And so the end of this book actually has a good message because I'm trying to prove the point that, you know, humans are not bloodthirsty killers, but they are actually made of love, and this is what's going to, you know, help us overcome all of this princess warrior programming in the end, because we are actually good and loving and nurturing, lovely beings.
Okay, let's talk about the latest book, and that is Hollywood Mind Control. And so you talk about Hollywood royalty, old and new gods in this one. And what is your idea here? I like how you go into some pretty good depth with the history of the idea of the Babylonian gods and how this ties into Hollywood, because there's that massive Babylonian gate.
Oh, right. So, yeah, when you go down to Hollywood Boulevard and the Kodak Center, which is where they always have the Academy Awards, you have this Babylonian archway that was actually from a movie called Intolerance by D.W. Griffith.
Right.
And it's got these two gods on either side, and it's got the Sumerian Tree of Life in there, the squiggly one. Mm-hmm. And it's got all of these, Mesopotamian signs and architecture. And so in this chapter is kind of like the beginning of time, and where do we even get the idea of royalty, right? And if you go back to the first writings on the stone and clay tablets of cuneiform and Babylon and Ur and Erech and those places, it was actually gods ruling their city-state, beings who humans looked at with gigantic eyeballs and couldn't believe what they were seeing, and they came from the sky, and they had supernatural powers, and they were bigger than everyone else, and these and their offspring were what was considered royalty. So this is really weird stuff. Right? And so
Genesis 6 type stuff.
Yeah.
Right.
And so the origin of drama and movies and play acting and all that is actually the mystery schools and cults that formed up around these ancient gods, and they would play act that they were the god. You know, the king was the god and the queen was the goddess, and they would have a public lovemaking ceremony, and this was a yearly thing, and it was a really big deal. And they would have other mystery plays for the public, and then they would have secret initiation plays for initiates only. And this is the the origin of Hollywood, basically, and where we get acting and drama from. And so I have a example of the third degree of masonry here, where the candidate plays Hiram Abiff and
reenacts, plays the role, right? And
they have this whole dialogue and story, and it is a play. And he goes around and he is killed by the three ruffians and resurrected, and so it gives them the secret password, and then he's buried again. And so this is what they're doing behind closed doors. Like when they go to the Masonic meetings, they're dressing up and using plays as self-transformative psychodrama.
Yeah. Good point. Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. So I like that you point out the movie From Hell, which actually has that imagery in it.
Mm-hmm.
The Johnny Depp, based on the Alan Moore story that's supposed to be about Jack the Ripper. So you go on to talk about Masonry in Hollywood. You talk about the Golden Age and all that, and then you go deeper into the mythology of the Assyrians and the Babylonians and the cult there and the rise of their view of royalty. And you talk about, interestingly, the notion that we are the creation of the gods, who also kind of match up to the aliens. And that makes me think of panspermia, which is the Darwinian version of the alien myth that were created by the alien gods,
mm-hmm.
so to speak.
And one of the the gods that I kind of center on in this book chapter is Inanna, who was a hermaphroditic goddess who was worshipped by cross-dressers, and she was also worshipped by sacred prostitutes. And so her cult and her priestesses were the ones who would do this annual festival of fertility with the king, and they would reenact the Inanna and Dumuzi. And so actually, when they would have a war between cities, whoever won, they would consider that Inanna's will.
Right.
And as long as the king kept the sacred marriage ritual with the priestess of Inanna, everything could go on as before.
Well, and this is where we get into sex magic,
mm-hmm.
because this idea is not new. We're looking back here at sacred brothels that were dedicated to the goddess, and the religious prostitution,
right?
And the Queen of Heaven and all that, androgynous clothing. So what we're actually seeing today is not new.
No, it's from the beginning of time. And this is actually how they conquered people and settled cities, because back then there was kind of this division between people who wanted to kind of live with nature in the wilderness in their tribe-like ways, and then people who wanted to be Sex in the City. And so these the whole story of Gilgamesh and Enkidu is kind of an example of how they were luring people into the city, because people who are more congested, what is that word? Living together in densely populated are easily more controlled by the king and the priestcraft too. And so then we get into Babylon and Marduk and the story of the creation of the world, and how Babylon was actually like supposed to be the center of the world.
Right. So now, how do you say? Then you go to saying Hollywood is Babylon.
Uh-huh.
So now, is this like the idea of Kenneth Anger?
Well, kind of, because Babylon always had this reputation as being, den of iniquity,
Mm-hmm.
and against God and against nature, and all for like the city-state and power and might is right, and worship of the king and the priestcraft. And so definitely I think that Hollywood would fit that bill. And
right.
Then you have Aleister Crowley also, who his goal was to...
Well, he says the Set is the god of our era. That is the name of this era.
Set?
Yeah.
Oh, right. His personal holy guardian angel, Crowley said, is, the devil or Set or Satan.
But he also says it's appropriate to this age.
I would think that too. That's what Michael Aquino said.
Right.
So he says that we're past the Aeon of Horus, and now we're in the Aeon of Set.
Mm-hmm. Now, so what do you get from this? Ultimately, you seem to take it in the direction of saying that it's basically all. What is this all about? It's about slavery. Is that what you think?
I do. I think cities are built on slaves, and all these like great monuments have to require human sacrifice, and for there to be these types of god kings that rule the world, they're always gonna be enslaving people.
But this is in the chapter about Hollywood. So
Uh-huh.
what I'm saying is, you think that that's Hollywood too, is
I
exist
do.
to make us slaves.
Yes, definitely, and also in the more real way of the trauma-based mind control slaves.
Right.
So, you know, from the beginning of city creation, there's always been people who have been enslaved to build these things.
I see. Right. So built on the, Egypt and the pyramids are built by slaves.
Mm-hmm.
So you go on to talk about Hollywood Ultra. What are we talking about here? Hollywood and the CIA, something I've written about.
Right, and so here we have examples of Hollywood stars working very closely with the CIA. One comes to mind is Jennifer Garner, who is in that show Alias, right, where she's playing all different kind of characters, or so alters, and MK Ultra comes from the CIA, right? And then you have her going on to actually make recruiting videos for the CIA.
Exactly,
Yeah.
right.
And
Well, I was going to say the list of these people, is very long. Howard Hughes, Harry Houdini, John Ford, Ian Fleming, Josephine Baker, Noel Coward, Coco Chanel, Greta Garbo, Hedy Lamarr, Roald Dahl, Cary Grant, Sterling Hayden, Marlene Dietrich, Julia Child, Frank Sinatra. These are all Hollywood types, music types, who then are intimately connected with the intelligence agencies or military intelligence and so forth.
right. So here you have all these spies and possibly alter personalities working very closely with the CIA and Hollywood, and so it's just pretty much infiltrated at this point. I think it's saturated with government agencies, and even to the point where the CIA and the FBI have final say on certain scripts, and they can insert things that are favorable to them, and they can take out things that put them in a bad light. And so I don't think that a lot of people realize how much the government agencies control what we see coming out of Hollywood.
Right. Yeah, and I think that interestingly, this chapter cites Jay's analysis a couple times here, so that's good. And then you talk about the mega meltdowns,
right?
And this is like Britney and Amanda Bynes, and maybe even Shia LaBeouf. What do you make of those meltdowns?
Yeah, that's what we were talking about before. So, like you said, the brain is this incredible thing, and when these people start to come of age, their brain tries to integrate and kind of deal with what's been happening to them their whole life. And this is what you see in a meltdown like Britney Spears or Amanda Bynes, is their mind trying to grapple with what they've been doing, and then like I said before, they're either marginalized and thought of as crazy, or they're taken back to a rehab like Britney was to be reprogrammed. And then at the end of that chapter, we talk a little bit about the pedophilia problem in Hollywood. And so this is kind of a cornerstone of the Monarch programming, is pedophilia, and then how rife it is in Hollywood, and how it's just kind of the open secret that most of these child stars have been abused in some way or another. And I cite the movie Goonies as a prime example, because
One-Eyed Willie.
They're searching for One-Eyed Willie's rich stuff, right? And Corey Feldman actually came out and wrote a book about this, and it's called Choreography. I recommend you pick that up.
Yeah, the key to the treasure is looks like a dick and balls.
Yeah.
In the movie.
Yeah, and even in the very first scene, I think they are horsing around and they break this statue of
Right.
David.
He puts it in his mouth.
That, and then when they glue it back on, it's upside down, so it looks like an erection. Right.
So the next chapter, you quote the interesting Cronenberg movie, Videodrome. The battle for the mind of North America will be fought in the video arena, the Videodrome.
Right.
And then you cite Hoffman. In the end, what we have is a highly symbolic ritual working, broadcast to millions of people, a satanic inversion of a black mass where the pews are filled by the entire nation, through which humanity is brutalized and debased in this Negredo phase of the alchemical process. So what is this high profile ritual idea here?
Right. So this is the idea that when you are watching something like a Super Bowl or a rock concert or Grammys or a VMAs, this is not just a performance. This is a ritual planned out and with elements of all kinds of mystery school and satanic imagery.
And that's absolutely true, especially when you look at for example, the image of Pink when she performed at the 2009 VMAs. She's obviously doing the Enter Apprentice Masonic thing here.
Right, and then you have Britney coming out with that dance that she did with the snake.
Mm-hmm.
And then I have a picture of a woman on the altar of the Church of Satan, Anton LaVey's church, and she's doing the exact same thing, putting the snake on her shoulders. You have Lady Gaga doing blood rituals. I mean, that's
Right.
kind of her favorite go-to thing, is being smeared in blood. I've seen her do that several times.
Yeah, I have to, yeah.
Even to the point of, that whole thing where she was coming out of an egg. So that is another reference to the goddess, and that was actually more than a performance, because she stayed in that egg for 3 days preparing herself, and she came out and she was saying, I'm born this way. Right, but then she had horns and things pasted on her, and that was her look for a while, as she was born as this demonic character.
Now, what about Madonna? Is she the queen of all this?
She was, in my opinion, but now I think that's gone to Beyonce. But definitely Madonna, when she did the Super Bowl, it was rife with this kind of
she
imagery.
looks like this total Babylonian.
Or
goddess.
a Roman
Right.
kind of goddess. And then so this all, in my opinion, these are ways to reveal the method, and I know you talk a lot about the revelation of the method, is these high profile rituals conditioning people to accept things like blood sacrifice and
mass traumatization,
right, and
shock value,
public sex rituals and things that went on in ancient times that they would like to see come back.
Right, yeah, exactly. So next you talk about Britney, and this is something that we haven't Britney's kind of been forgotten in this whole genre of stuff, but it's worth revisiting, because Britney was she was like Miley, where she was this innocent chick, and then she becomes the whore.
Right, the whore of Babylon, and
right.
So that's part of Crowley's Scarlet Woman. Is he puts Ishtar, who is also Inanna, Kali, and the whore of Babylon from Revelations, and that is his Scarlet Woman. And so my theory is that what they're trying to do is incarnate the spirit of this Scarlet Woman goddess in these different girls, and they have to take them when they're young and virginal and innocent and make them into a sex symbol when they're not of age yet, just like Britney Spears and all of the rest. But if you watch her videos, it's very interesting. If you watch them in chronological order, they tell a really.
Well, I think what's interesting is the ones like Toxic, and I guess is it Break the Ice, where there's all this espionage CIA stuff going on in the videos.
Yeah, and Break the Ice, actually, she is a cartoon, and she breaks into this Eyes Wide Shut type party where they have a checkerboard floor and everyone's dressed up like a masquerade ball. Mm-hmm. And then she goes underneath the party, and there is a clone lab with a bunch of clone Britneys, and she has to fight these demonic men in black and blow up her clone lab with her own clones in it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I remember watching that. You pointed it out, because I hadn't seen it, and I was like, wow, that's... And then, the Bad Blood video, it's this theme of them being spy. I know that's a pop culture theme, but, it makes you wonder if more might be going on. So you have this really long chapter where Queen Bee. Tell us a little bit about why Beyonce is so important in all this.
Okay. Yeah, I think she is the new queen, and she is the new spokesperson for the Aeon of Horus or Set or whatever you want to call it.
The rap gods and the black gods.
Yeah. Well, there's just so much about her. I mean, her whole career has been like this thing to track, and I even have more pages that didn't even make it into the book because it was so interesting. But
well, you pointed out this Church of Bay, which I never heard of. There's an actual church that
right.
where they think she's really, and I didn't believe it, and you pointed it out to me, and it was a Huffington Post or Elite Daily or some crap website of some chick talking about her religious experience she felt at a Beyonce concert.
And so here's another one who has had this kind of like devilish fall. Like, she came out and when she started, she was very Christian. Like, they would sing hymns on their albums.
Right, I forgot about that, yeah.
She was always saying, I'm very humble and I thank God and all this stuff. And then she would even say, like, if I ever get an attitude, then slap it out of me. But now she's like the queen of attitude, right? And so we watched this transformation.
She saw us first, girl.
Exactly.
She saw us first.
So she was initiated, in my opinion, deeper and deeper things. I think Jay-Z's probably in the OTO. I can't prove that, but...
Well, he wears curly shirts.
He does, and he even puts them on his clothing line. So there you go.
Right.
And then the whole Rockefeller triangle thing that they do,
Yeah.
That's actually called the triangle of manifestation,
right.
And also a sign of the fire goddess. And you can find this in one of Crowley's rituals that they're holding up the triangle of manifestation.
Right.
But so Jay-Z has a whole another chapter can be written about Jay-Z, but he is all about being a god on earth, and he's Jehovah, and Kanye West is Jesus, and what else we got? Oh yeah, and so you can
but he's hurting for money now.
Oh really?
Remember? Yeah, we saw that Kanye was broke. And
Kanye, yeah. He's a funny guy.
I would think that a god wouldn't have money problems, but.
But even Beyonce in her professional photo shoots can be seen with this like goat, this Baphomet goat, and she's like riding this motorcycle and even has another goat head on it, and so the goat is a classic symbol of Satanism, right? And let's see.
Well, a lot of this sounds far out, but when you really look at this stuff, it's there.
I think so. I think that her Super Bowl performance, the one where they did in New Orleans, was really interesting. That even made mainstream news. Like, what happened to her when she started performing? And so she even says in interviews, like, when I go on stage, something else takes over me. And so this kind of rings back to the whole voodoo thing where you are possessed by another spirit.
Well, yeah, you talk about Afrocentrism, and we see these paintings of her like the Madonna and Child. It's just utterly insane.
Well, her child is actually considered like American royalty, and they are related to, they're like cousins to the Prince Charles and Kate's baby. Something
what?
That's in my book.
Oh, surely not.
It is. And so they're part of the Merovingian family. I
don't believe that.
That's
you may be right.
That's what they claim.
I was wrong about the Church of Bay thing. I didn't believe you about that,
But they are saying they are part of the Merovingian family.
You're saying Beyonce literally says this?
Yeah.
That's insane.
And then even her name. Okay, so let's talk about one of her performances, where she is the whore Babylon from Metropolis.
Metropolis, right?
Yeah. So this kind of goes back to what we were talking about in the beginning about sorcerers and robots and Metropolis, and he has to like sacrifice part of himself to animate this robot who becomes the whore of Babylon to like make all the men in the town into a frenzy.
Right,
with her
which
dancing and stuff like that.
The German expressionism of Fritz Lang is explicitly satanic.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, there's inverted pentagram and everything.
Right. And so in many places, Beyonce can be seen with this like robotic hand, and then even dressing up like
she's 100% obviously the robot from Metropolis in that performance.
So this is the Scarlet Woman symbolism that they are putting on, and I think they put it on really heavily on Beyonce.
Mm-hmm.
And the bee is actually a symbol of like a queen or like the divine feminine.
That's a classic royalty symbol and a Masonic symbol and a Mormon symbol.
Right, and so this goes back to Venus and all that, and so I recommend you get this book because it has this whole thing about bees and how this is the symbol of their perfect society in Masonic thought, is that you have a hive of workers and you have drones and you have one queen to rule them all.
Well, yeah, I mean that's strange though, because Masonry is also supposed to be anti-royalty, but really what I think that is that Masonry is kind of a front for a different royalty. I mean, Masonry is all under the Queen.
Mm-hmm.
The Grand Lodge of London is under the Queen.
Yeah.
So you're not getting away from monarchy through that. So what's the end result of all? I mean, you've got so much on Beyonce here. Where does this end? Mistress of the Universe.
Yeah. Well, okay. So here's some more Inanna symbolism again, because Kali and Ishtar Inanna were known as the Mistress of the Universe, and then you have like people like Oprah. Mm-hmm. Whenever Beyonce goes on Oprah, like Oprah bows down to her, and it's really weird how they all treat her, because they bow down, like as if she was a queen. Even I've seen Katy Perry.
Well, Katy Perry said in your chapter, you quoted her talking about seeing a poster, and she like reverences it like it's an icon,
and she bows down and says, "I'm not worthy."
Yeah.
And so, even Oprah says, "I think of you as the rule of the world. You are the preeminent mistress of the universe." And then she says, Oprah goes on to say about the Super Bowl that we were talking about in New Orleans. She says, "You know what I thought it was watching you there? I thought that is where art meets God."
These people are insane.
They are.
They literally think they're God.
And like, why is Oprah like fawning all over Beyonce, who has only had a tiny career compared to Oprah, who's like established?
Well, that's a good point. Yeah.
Should be a more powerful black woman than.
Well, and she's got like $1 billion.
Beyonce, right?
Beyonce's.
But okay, not only that, but Beyonce and Jay-Z are very close friends with Obama's.
Sure. Yeah.
And so there's something really weird going on there with Obama and Beyonce, because she has sang at his inaugurations, she sang at his presidential balls, she's had private birthday parties with them.
Right. Yeah.
I definitely think that there's something really creepy going on with the Carters and the Obamas. Oh, here, let's see. Okay, never mind. But I really recommend you, when you get this, look at this part about how Nikola Tesla talks about feminism, because so Beyonce is like the new face of feminism.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And even though she's getting more and more hyperly sexualized, even to the point where she needed a new altar called Yonsei, because even Sasha Fierce wasn't as sexualized as Yonsei in her new album, which is titled Beyonce.
Yeah, that's a good point. And that Tesla thing on feminism is great. I read that a few years ago.
Mm-hmm.
Now let's talk a little bit about Katie, and then we will come to a close here.
Okay.
Why'd you include Katie?
I did because she had that whole Super Bowl performance that I kind of hit the nail on the head about what we might see, because all this talk about the OTO and sex magic, and where this all meets rock and roll in the entertainment industry. And I said, when they're putting the Scarlet Woman imagery on these girls, what they're going to need to do is either have one coming out riding this beast with 7 heads and 10 crowns, or if it was more subtle, they would have her on a cat-like beast, because this I got from a story about Jack Parsons and L. Ron Hubbard of Scientology when they saw a vision of the Scarlet Woman. Mm-hmm. And it's just like when Katy Perry came on the Super Bowl, she looks exactly like the Lust card from the Thoth Tarot deck of Aleister Crowley.
Right.
And she's even wearing the flaming dress and everything. And she's
so like a flaming hot Cheeto.
Yeah. So Katy Perry has some interesting roots. Her dad is this Christian preacher who I don't trust one bit.
Who's tied into megachurch preachers in South Korea, I think, who are money launderers. Mm-hmm.
Well, he even says that he used to sell LSD for Timothy Leary and stuff like that.
Right, yeah, he's buddies with Tim Leary.
Yeah. So she has this whole, like, Christian side, and she's actually said publicly a lot that she sold her soul to the devil.
Right.
And so she's kind of an example of what these girls can achieve if they do the same thing. You know,
right.
If you sell your soul to the devil, you can be as popular as Katy Perry.
All right, so then we've got a chapter on Jacko, which maybe bears mentioning a little bit here, because what's your thesis on Jacko?
This one I co-wrote with a friend who is probably the biggest Michael Jackson fan you ever met, and who actually snuck into Neverland after it was closed just to, like, get some pictures and see what was up. But, yeah, I really like Michael Jackson. I think he had a really positive message. I think he was probably a total victim of the entertainment industry, being a performer since childhood. He had his childhood stolen from him, which is a tale of a lot of these child actors. They say that, you know, their innocence was stolen.
Right.
But he came back to be, you know, probably one of the most beloved entertainers of all time, and I don't think he ever lost that you know, the love in his heart and the positive message that he was trying to give to the world, and also trying to warn people about things like Illuminati in a kind of veiled way, in his own way. I don't know whether he was killed or not, or he...
Well, there's always weird things about the doctor and the coroner and the death and all that.
Oh, yeah, I'm sure. There's, like, so many bizarre... factors surrounding his death, but I mean, no matter if they killed him or he, you know, just overdosed, he was still like a victim of this industry. Yeah.
All right, well, that was a great 2 hours there. So as we said, the first book is Operation Culture Creation Part 1, then Operation Culture Creation Part 2, and Hollywood Mind Control, all of which can be purchased in the links below, as well as at Freeman TV under the Weird Stuff section. And you've been listening to Esoteric Hollywood. I'm Jay Dyer, and we were talking to Jamie Hanshaw. Thank you for listening.